First of all, welcome and thank you again, everyone, for registering. We've had a really great turnout again. Special thanks to Stefan and Tink for supporting this one. This is going to be a little bit different than the ones we've done before. Hopefully you find it interesting. The idea being that, just so everyone's aware, we'll give a bit of an overview as to kind of what Prove and Tink do, and then we'll go into some discussion around open banking, collaboration, and identity for that matter. And we really encourage participation. So please, if you've got any questions, throw them in. We'll try and get through them as we're live. But if we don't, we will certainly respond afterwards. I think one thing that we want to just be kind of clear on today is that there's a lot of conversations at the moment around collaboration and where the opportunity lies really with financial services and other elements of kind of banking generally across Europe and the globe. But we want to try and focus a lot on the tangible and how we can impact on day-to-day lives. So the idea here today was that with Stefan, who I'll ask to introduce himself in a minute, is that we've got an interesting organisation that is at the heart of open banking. And alongside ourselves, who Prove as being an identity organisation, there's a real feeling of additional collaboration, all the impacts of what's happened in the pandemic, plus the general kind of digital disruption that's ongoing. There's a real feeling today that kind of the likes of ourselves and Tink are really at the heart of it. So just very briefly on myself. So my name is Kieran Dalton. I know a lot of people who've registered for this event. I'm responsible for the UK for Prove. We are in the midst of a huge kind of global expansion. So we've been operational now in the US for a number of years, but we're taking our phone-centric identity proposition now to multiple countries and multiple regions. And so that's my role. And Stefan, do you want to kind of give an intro?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much, Kieran. I'm Stefan Verkalker. I'm leading new open banking partnerships for the UK and for the global markets here at Tink. So thanks so much for having me here.
Fantastic, thank you. So if we can just start, so if you can just go to the next slide, please. This feels a little bit like the government COVID run-throughs, but yes. So let me just give you a very brief overview. We're not trying to kind of overly sell anything here. The idea being that we just want to get across what the concept is and, if anything, recognize the opportunity. So our proposition is very much the idea of focusing on the phone number as being the perfect conduit to somebody's identity. So the idea being that it's as straightforward as the technology suggests, but leveraging the fact that we've basically these days, from the age of 11 onwards, we get a mobile phone. And so we're exposed to that kind of digital ecosystem, probably first before any other services that are out there. And so consequently, there's a huge amount of tenure, history, understanding around how people are using their phones, the patterns of behavior, and ultimately how somebody caters for their digital life. And so if you look at this as a particular slide, what we're doing is we're collaborating with a number of different sources ranging from the telcos. You can see banks there, which is obviously relevant with Tink with us today. But we're also looking at other elements such as fundamentally behavior. So how people are typing things, how people are walking, even using their mobile phone. What we try and emphasize is that we're all about trust. So obviously, we cater for the fact that we determine risk, but from a trust perspective, we're trying to give entities confidence that they can either onboard or digitally transact with a particular user because they can trust the mobile that they're using at that time. And so we're looking at ways of determining whether bad actors are present, whether we can continue with contextual authentication around certain services, and ultimately tokenizing identity fundamentally. Francesco, can you just go to the next slide? Sorry, my throat's gone, which is great. So in essence, and I'll skip through this very quickly, it comes down to three pillars. So A, determining possession of the phone. So whether that be something like SMS OTP or something more forward thinking, such as mobile authentication, which is live now with 2 tier 1 banks in the UK. We've got reputational checks, so we can determine based on a number of different signals whether you can trust the number or not. And then from an ownership perspective, the idea there is that it's establishing trust around, okay, this is a phone number, but is it actually in ownership of a particular individual with a particular address, date of birth, and other attributes? So that then enables other services to be able to kind of be developed off the back of it. And then if we could just go to the next slide very briefly before I hand over to Stefan. So then in a nutshell, this is effectively what the use case is. So old world, you'd be entering a lot of PII information. There'll be a lot of data entry and cumbersome practices involved. What we're advocating and what we're providing today is a mechanism to leverage the phone number with some minimal PII to perform tasks such as onboarding, or it may even be something as like a digital servicing kind of proposition, so changing address details. So this is live, operational, in use. And what I want to emphasize here is that, and this is why somebody like Tink is so relevant to somebody like ourselves, that we're all about reducing friction and we're all about introducing insights that already exist. So let's leverage authoritative data sources. Let's leverage behaviors and patterns to determine, actually, we can have confidence in these people. So why are we adding friction? And I think that's a good point just to hand over now to Stefan so he can just go through an introduction to Tink.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kieran. And first of all, let me say that's I mean, two things, right? I think, first of all, that what you do in the digital identity space, we spoke about it a little bit before the webinar, but I think it's just as open banking, such an emerging industry, especially over the last 18 months, where we've seen a flight to digital, so to say. We've seen so many articles, researches about it, and I think what we both do is quite spot on there, right? Secondly, what you mentioned, both the focus indeed on frictionless journeys, automating onboarding, and so on, increasing conversion rates. What we see as well, I think there's so much more to do still, and it's really great, to be part of that. But all right, let me give some introduction about Tink then. So Tink is Europe's largest open banking platform. We serve large financial institutions, banks, fintechs, PSPs, and we have over 10,000 developers on the platform today. The company was founded in 2012, and today we are active across 18 European markets. We provide access to products on top of AIS and PIS, account information services and payment initiation services and related services. And the product lines are our accounts, risk, money manager, and payments. The mission of Tink is to power the new world of finance, and we set out to empower organizations that are looking at technology not only as a cost, or not as a cost at all, but rather as an opportunity to improve many of the things that we do today, right? So that can be anything from internal operational objectives as driving incremental growth and reducing risk, to anything on the front end, such as the way you deliver your product with great user journeys. So that's in short about Tink, and I wanted to take the opportunity directly in the intro as well to share something about two open banking reports that we've just released. I actually got the PDF of one of our reports here as well that I printed because I wanted to prepare a couple of figures to share during the session today. And I think in the light of the theme of today's session as well, I thought it would be interesting to have a look at some of the findings of the report and why we see so much traction on open banking. So if you could go to the next slide, Francesco, then we have a few figures here that we see on more of like a macro level. According to a research by Deutsche Bank, bank revenues in 2020 were at the lowest since 2008. And that was at the peak of the financial crisis. And that's 15% lower than where it was at the start of the decade. On the back of that, one of the major concerns of banks today and large financial institutions today is credit risk, where over 2/3 of retail banks acknowledge that the pandemic has driven an increased credit risk. we know, of course, that so many measures have been taken by diverse governments all around the world to cushion the impact of the crisis. In 2020, for instance, the UK government issued 180 billion pounds in affordable credit, which benefited over 1.5 million companies to keep their business up and running, so they could continue to trade, continue to keep their employees. And as a result of that, bankruptcies in the UK and other European countries fell by 50% of, or even more. So while that's of course like great news for people keeping their jobs, it also raises the concern, I'd say, for companies that are on life support and maybe are never able to repay their debts. I believe in like a report that got recently issued by the European Central Bank, they called zombie companies. So in a nutshell, it presents a risk for companies' affordability to pay off their loans, and it also shows the risk of the employment of millions of companies. So then one last thing I wanted to share is that, like, I mean, while these statements can be very concerning, of course, and I didn't want to start too depressive with all these major concerns, but I think where the great opportunity is for industries such as where yourselves with digital identity and open banking is that our research has found that 41% of financial executives actually believe that the digital shift caused by COVID is permanent. And that has led to the following three priorities for banking executives. I think I have it on the next slide, Francesco. So first of all, is continuing the creation of digital services. Secondly, it's differentiate on the customer experiences. And thirdly, it's restoring profitability. And for all of that, there's such massive potential for open banking to enable all of those. So yeah, really looking forward to share a bit more of that later on. But this is already a teaser, I think.
Thank you. Cheers, Stefan. So right, I often say this, but in the spirit of openness, so what we've done is we've prepared a few themes. So we want to make this as conversational as possible. So there will be kind of toing and froing, but honestly, if anybody's got any questions or any input, please, feel free to ask. But what we're going to do is we're just going to go through some of the findings that we've had, some of the findings that Tink have had, and talk about really where we've kind of applied some of our thinking and technology to kind of improve customer experiences and improve a lot of the kind of digital expansion, if you like. So I've said this once before, but thank you again to Stefan and Tink for coming on. What I'm going to ask as a kind of starting point here is that, so I think it's fair to say that from a Prove perspective, we like to think of ourselves as thinking differently. Something that personally I've talked about in the past is this kind of concept of open mobile, if you like. So where there's more and more collaboration and almost co-opetition across multiple geographies, because we're all learning and we're all finding different insights. I was keen to know kind of from a Tink perspective, how do you kind of see the world of financial services differently? What sets you apart, similar to kind of how I just kind of described Proof?
Yeah, no, and I think the thing that you describe about having more like open data, I mean, moving from like open data, open banking to like open data, open everything at one point, I think that's quite a central theme, because we see now the results of that open banking has proven today, right? Maybe it's good to in order to understand how we see the financial services, how we approach the world of financial services differently, to take a step back, just to give like a brief intro where it all started when it comes to open banking, right? Think of the open banking mandate in the UK that had one of the objectives to that transaction data should not be exclusively available to the banks themselves, but available to each and everyone, right? If you go into your HSBC account, that you don't only see your HSBC transactions, but you can see much more of that. And of course, all based on the consent of the user. Since the CMA9 order in the UK and a year later with PC2 in Europe, account information could suddenly be used by personal financial management apps, for instance, and get spending statistics, or on the business side of things, also use it for accounting purposes. But in a market where more and more providers are granted an ASP and a PSP license, it becomes increasingly important for Tink as well to differentiate ourselves. And our customers often revert to us as their one-stop shop for open banking solutions. We don't just focus on connectivity, but also a broad range of data on top of it, and payment services, and that across the UK and many European markets. So in general, we're very excited about data mobility as a core power of every country's infrastructure, as you mentioned as well, and to enable this also across multiple segments of finance. I can give one example, maybe related to identity platforms such as yours. I think that's what I thought about. And I mean, if you're an identity platform such as Proof that looks to confirm an individual's bank account ownership as part of your open banking journey, or as part of your onboarding journey, for instance, then we could provide you with like an open banking SDK that, with the user's consent, collects data such as the account holder, the account number, the sort code, and the equivalent of that, like IBAN number across Europe, of course. We can all collect it for you. And then imagine at the same time, for instance, for AML purposes, you'd like to identify someone's activity on a primary bank account. Or maybe, and that's also part of our risk products, you want to flag risky customer profiles by identifying large amounts of ATM withdrawals every week or every month, or fluctuating income patterns. And these are the type of solutions that we see is really a game changer. That's all pre-built, and we've seen customers going live with that in a matter of just like 2 to 4 weeks. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah, that's a great use case, and thank you for throwing it in, because obviously it's identity related, so that's perfect. One question I wanted to ask, so I'll give you my view, and I'm intrigued by your perspective. So how do I frame this without throwing myself under a bus? So many years ago, we explored the usage of data for lots of different reasons. This wasn't within Prove or Payphone, but the idea being that as long as the use case is correct, we had an opportunity to innovate and test and do a lot of skunk work activity. What I believe is that where a lot of people see things like GDPR as actually cumbersome and an issue, I actually see it more as an opportunity, because it's meant we've almost kind of started in the right way, as opposed to kind of bolting things together further down the line. And with the auditability and the right to forget and all those other things, consent, etc., I see it as a positive. I was just intrigued because obviously open banking and the kind of data that's being exchanged, etc. Have you found that it's been beneficial that something like GDPR is in place in comparison to maybe other countries or other regions?
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree with that, Kieran. I think it's GDPR. I think, like, as a base of open banking, data legislation, having infrastructure in place, the whole consent mechanism, that's all the foundation of open banking on itself, I believe, and that's how we consider it as Tink as well, because it's so important for users to understand why you're actually sharing data. So understand, like, okay, I'm going to share my transaction details, but what for actually? I mean, it's part of our privacy, right? I don't want to just share my transaction details for no purpose. So if you show clearly, and that's all built on like both PSD2 and GDPR, of course, that is for the purpose of getting to know spending statistics, or with NatWest, what we do, for instance, they have the spending step in their mobile banking app, all built on Tink's technology, and millions of users using that. Enable them to set savings goals, for instance, and establish a better financial health. I think that the foundations of sharing the data should be very clear to users, also to drive adoption rates. So definitely agree with that.
Fantastic. First of all, I just want to, before I go on to another question, thank you for actually posting a question. So I've just noticed there's one that's come in. We'll tackle that in a second, and I hope I can answer it without sounding like I'm kind of, I don't know, sitting on a fence. But anyway, we'll keep going and then we'll come back to that. But thank you, and please, any other questions, throw in. So from obviously the world's been upside down for a while now, but are you finding that there's a consistent theme that's kind of driving and supporting some of the work that you're doing at the moment? Because I'm finding, sorry, I thought my screen had gone then. I'm finding
Only.
that, so from a proof perspective, obviously there are multiple drivers for these kind of services, but PSD2 in particular, and the ability to authenticate and the ability to determine risk and trust, that's kind of central to a lot of what we're doing. And also looking at that strategically further forward. So what does PSD3 look like for, and however many other numbers we have further down the line. So yeah, I was just intrigued, is it a particular payments conversation that's driving a lot of what you're doing at the moment, or other things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there are definitely like a few consistent themes that we see. I think first of all is indeed payments. Payments definitely a hot topic right now in open banking. I mean, that doesn't mean, of course, that it takes away all the attention from account information services. On the contrary, even I would say, value-added solutions built on AIS have always been at the core of Think's business. That's our legacy as well. And given that we've enriched billions of transactions over the past years across 18 European markets, the demand from different companies, and it can be anything from banks to lenders to identity platforms, it's something that we see that keeps rising. So if we look back at like a couple of years ago, for instance, open banking was a lot about personal financial management apps and like a whole app designed around open banking. But right now we see that it's more and more used as a microservice actually, and we see new propositions coming up that we haven't seen before. Think of open banking transactions fueling into like a carbon footprint tracking app, or real estate platforms that allows tenants to pay the monthly invoice within just a few taps from the app. And I think those things are really exciting. But coming back to like payments as a hot topic, and I think that's also a very natural step if we consider the majority of payments APIs today, and more platforms see how open banking powered payments is a really strong value proposition compared to existing payment methods. The demand for open banking started in the aggregation space for consumers, where we work with a few leading banks that provide users an aggregated view of all their accounts in one place. But then comes consumer payments, where typical use cases today are things such as wallet top-ups for investment platforms. So really one-off payments with high value, low frequency. That's we see what works really well today. And also me-to-me transfers. So imagine that you connect multiple bank accounts in one place, and you want to make a transfer from your savings accounts at one bank to your checking accounts at the other bank, or vice versa. Then it works very powerful. Also because you can pre-fill fields such as payment amount, the reference, and the recipient account. So I think like when it comes to like main team payments, very hot topic, definitely. And we also see, I mean, it's like a whole sequence where I said like it started with consumer AS, then it's consumer PIS, then it's business AS and business PS. So after account aggregation, payment initiation on consumer side, we see very interesting propositions on the business side as well as another hot topic. And we really see interest picking up on this end over the last 12 months. So think of account validations, business account transactions, and so on. And we hear from banks that, yeah, especially in the SME space, there's a massive need for these kinds of services in the accounting, but also for treasury management, for instance.
Interesting. We were recently over at the European Money 2020, and I did see a recurring theme, particularly around this kind of idea of kind of green finance or green banking or whatever term we want to use. But just seeing, for example, people who are regularly making payments for fuel, and then that being leveraged as a method of determining carbon footprint and things. It's a particularly hot topic in the UK because we have no fuel at the moment. You may have seen, supposedly. Let's not go there. But yeah, I think it's fascinating how it kind of opens the door, doesn't it, to additional thinking around not just risk and trust, but also actually what does my footprint look like? How am I impacting on various other things outside of just myself, really? So yeah, no, it's interesting that you brought that up. I've noticed now that we're getting lots of questions, which is beyond exciting. Anyway, we'll pick those up in a second. Sorry, I'm being distracted. So We have a couple of themes that we're going to talk around, where specifically we talk around kind of global operations and kind of rolling into other countries. So I think that might help with some of the kind of identity interoperability, if you like, across multiple regions. Actually, looking at one of the questions there, Stefan, it might be worth you tackling it now, because it's talking of what the duration of a me-to-me transfer between my own bank account and stock trading platform. Is it instant?
Yes, no, very, very good question. Also, when comparing to existing payments, payment methods, of course. So, open banking payments that uses the bank's payment rail, so to say. So, in the UK, so for instance, we support faster payments. In Europe, that's SEPA Instant, for instance. So that goes on the same speed as the bank's payments rail, so to say. So that can be really in a matter of less than a minute or a few minutes.
Excellent. So yeah, I think you've managed to answer all three questions there. So yes, it's seamless. Yes, it's quick, and it leverages the infrastructure that's there. So obviously the UK in particular is in a decent place. Since we're talking kind of tangible, as in, payments being made and the speed, etc. So from using, again, I'll start with Prove in terms of kind of what we're impacting on. So a lot of the use cases that we are in are predominantly focused around that kind of onboarding arena. So it's about removing friction. So a prime example is we've managed to increase day one registrations by 25% in some of our use cases. We've got an obvious kind of anti-fraud angle as well, because it's about trust and risk, and some of our methods of determining authentication and authorization have almost kind of removed the challenges of things like social engineering, because ultimately what we're trying to do is reduce the human element, because obviously the human element is particularly vulnerable. So there's a number of projects, and I'm going to touch on a couple of these in a bit. But what I want to do is kind of ask yourself. So my experience of open banking a couple of years ago, and I distinctly remember having a conversation with somebody in a bank who said no one's really come along and come up with a killer app, or there's no critical mass being created and things like that. But I think the world's a very different place now. So if you could just give a couple of examples, I'd be really intrigued.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think indeed, a couple of years ago, open banking was in such a different position as where it is today. I mean, if you only look at adoption rates over the past year, one and a half year, and I'm talking like UK only. I think at the start of the pandemic, there were 1 million monthly active users in the UK, January 2020, we're talking about then. And I think like the latest numbers are like 3.5 million monthly active users. So that is more than tripled over the terms of 1.5 years. And we think that this number is actually only gonna double quarter over quarter over the next year, 2 years. When it comes to like tangible impacts, as your original question, I think in the identity space, again, I think one exciting use case that we see there, and also when talking about taking away friction in onboarding journeys, I think that's with PayPal, the work that we do with them.
Sorry, I'm laughing because it's almost like we've prepped this. Sorry, carry on. Sorry to interrupt.
It was like I knew I was talking to an identity platform today.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah,
so it's well about PayPal. So before things started before PayPal used Tink, users had to manually add their bank account details to basically to add it to the PayPal wallet, right? So you had to manually enter the bank account details, and to verify that, you had to confirm it with a micro deposit, so with penny dropping basically, in which a reference was added in the metadata of the bank transfer, so to say. So time-consuming process led to drop-offs, no amazing conversion rates, and so on. So PayPal turned to us, said like, okay, guys, how can we work together on this? And what they do today is that they use things how we call the account check solution, and basically they can add their bank account with a simple open banking journey where data such as the account number, account holder, and sort code, again, this is all pre-filled. So it's three things, I would say, right? Verify the authenticity of an individual's bank account, collect the bank account details and then set up the direct debit mandate. So as a result, PayPal has now a quick and secure way to instantly verify accounts. And usually this took them like over a day or more than a day. Conversion rates went up by more than 20%, while they also significantly reduced the risk, of course, because through the mobile banking app you do the strong customer authentication, so you're sure that the individual belongs to the bank account.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's really good. And I think I may preempt something here, so I apologize. But some of the things that kind of direction of travel, and this is where I see a real kind of obvious synergy between the two of us. So in the US, we're kind of live and operational with the ability to kind of seamlessly pre-fill information for anything from account opening to kind of credit to, it could be multiple services. And so to do that, we obviously need authoritative data sources. We need understanding as to kind of who's in possession of a phone, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of blindingly obvious that, with authoritative data source such as yourselves, with the interconnectivity in the banks, it's totally appropriate. And then we see that as kind of like a direction of travel going into Europe and beyond as well, where there's an incredible amount of interest. And it all comes down to that core element that you've mentioned a few times, which is removing friction. Who do you typically deal with so in terms of kind of providing these services, who are the individuals that you work with, whether it be in the banks or other kind of service providers? Is it people that are typically kind of acquisition, onboarding, that type of thing, or is it something to do with kind of fraud? I'm just intrigued to know. Is it customer experience?
Yeah. Very can be. I mean, it depends. Yeah, no, that I think it's always a combination. I think what we strongly see when it comes to like especially in the risk space, then we talk a lot to like people on the compliance side of things. We're very interested. It depends also what the company's objective is, right? Okay, do they want to reduce risk? Do they want to stimulate incremental growth? Do they want to increase customer engagement, for instance? If it's the latter, then we talk to more to like product people, I would say, or like in customer experience. If it's about really reducing risk in the onboarding journey, for instance, or when we talk to a lender and they say like, okay, we see that currently we have too many customer profiles, too many high risk customer profiles. How can we reduce the risk and make sure that our debt management is better in place because of that? Then we talk to more people like on the compliance or risk side of things as well. So it really depends also what the objective is as well. We see by the way, in some larger banks is that they have like whole open banking divisions nowadays as well, because they really see that this as an emerging trend. And also coming back to the 3 priorities from open banking executives that we see today, they really see that as a reason to more concretely look at open banking as a project.
It's interesting actually, because looking at the people that have registered for this particular event, it was fascinating how many of them did have open banking as part of that job title. It doesn't seem that long ago that you wouldn't even see digital kind of referenced anywhere, but that you can see that obviously the direction of travel is you need to take these elements seriously. I think it's. I mean, one other thing I'd say is that from our perspective, is that from an identity element, we look at kind of trustworthy sources of information, and I mentioned kind of authoritative sources such as whether it be a telco, etc. I think it's fair to say that most people would still regard the banking information as probably being the most authoritative in terms of, obviously we're talking about financial elements. So yeah, I mean, for me, FinTechs, yourselves, etc. I think that's where the collaboration's gone to a whole new level, which incidentally brings me on to a question around collaboration. So when it comes to the kind of current landscape, when I say current landscape, I'm talking everything from pandemic to kind of where we are digital transformation wise. Have you noticed any significant changes? Because I know from our perspective, we have, and I'll go into them in a second, but some positive, some negative. I was just intrigued to know how you found the kind of landscape generally.
Yeah. I mean, changes. I mean, I'm happy that we're both back in the office, unless you have proof on your wall at home. I don't think so, but I think we're back in the office, so that's one great thing.
Well, to be fair, I live here, so yeah, it's it might as well be home. But anyway,
no, I think it's. I mean, things definitely changed, right? I think so many like banks, fintechs, they had to reprioritize their time plans and strategic objectives. I think our CEO mentioned earlier that we grew from 15 to 400 offices across Europe, as we are all working from home now.
From home.
So I know. I think like for any of us, it has been quite a we had to adapt to like the new circumstances in the beginning. If we look like to like the industry as a whole, some interesting trends that we've seen is that apart from like supermarkets, pretty much any public facility was closed, right? And that has also forced people from all demographics to become familiar with all new types of digital services, which, by the way, the technology for that already existed in many occasions, but it was not always as frequently used by everyone. So I think that if you ask me about, okay, what's changed really over the past 12 months or so, then we see that some organizations, depending on what their starting point is, have really stepped up the game and prioritized to provide a customer experience online that is similar to, or at least similar enough to how customers are served in the local store or the local branch.
So if I throw at you one thing that we found, so there's a kind of huge amount of momentum just before the pandemic hit around particularly identity services and stuff. Obviously, that's what we're living and breathing. And what we found is there was a short period of kind of inertia where there were a number of banks that we were speaking to that were a bit kind of, and I hate the term kind of new normal, but I'm going to use it anyway. But there was this theory of, we don't actually know what's going to happen. We don't know how the consumer wants to interact. We know a lot of the services are going to have to be replicated digitally and remotely, et cetera, but you know, it was almost like they didn't know whether people were just going to be turned away from certain elements altogether, and you know, transactions would just decline massively. I mean, from your experience, did you find that, you know, from a momentum perspective or from a discussion perspective, did it slow anything down initially before it settled into what the new normal is? If there is a new normal.
No. Interesting point to meet. I mean, indeed, in the beginning, I think like with especially larger institutions, how to say, where they had to adapt to the new situation, it was we see that things had to settle a bit before things started picking up again. I don't know how you saw that in conversations with your customers as well, but we saw, for instance, that I mean, banks really had to rethink their roadmap, right, for the next 12 or 18 months. What we've seen though as a challenge, and it's quite interesting because we spoke a little bit earlier about like customer adoption as well, and the flight to digital and all these things. But another challenge that we have seen, particularly over the last 18 months, is actually we call it the incumbency tech stack. So if I think objectively about the opportunities that we have in the pipeline today and where we're working with, then most of the time it's not about like Tink or other open banking or technology providers or whatsoever, but it's more about incumbents that want to move away to like a new world. But if you haven't moved yourself to the cloud, then this is a serious growth obstacle, right? Because you cannot like quickly scale to, let's say, like 1 million or 2 million users or whatever is beyond that. And I think that tends to be quite a common problem among financial institutions because launching something successfully could actually mean getting your digital channels down, and then it's difficult for you to step also into the space. So commercially, we tend to be quite involved in that as well. And when financial institutions are thinking of like a new platform or moving to the cloud, it's very common that they also turn to partners such as yourselves who have experience in doing that in a slick way. I don't know how you've experienced that also in your conversations with let's say, the larger insurance providers, banks, financial institutions versus fintechs, for instance, where we feel that things can change quicker, of course, but maybe you've experienced something similar.
Yeah, yeah. So what I would say, it's twofold really. There's a real interest in trying things. So there's a real interest in actually, we know we need to do something now. So, and I'm going to use the word tangible again, but that we're finding there's a lot more kind of proof of values, proof of concepts, and different things that can impact on certain kind of customer experiences. So that's been great, because I'm all for trying things as opposed to kind of just talking about them, if you like. But on the flip side, and it's not like that now, but for a period of time, the kind of skeletal operations that a lot of these major banks had, it meant that from a prioritization point of view, it almost became, in some instances anyway, it was like, well, we're not interested in acquiring, we're not interested in generating new products or services. We just need to work out a good way of handling who we have today, and making sure that it's appropriate and relevant and accessible. So, which I think came back lovingly to the kind of new normal conversation in terms of, well, actually, if we've got 20 million customers who all use our bank and suddenly they can't get to an ATM or they can't get to a branch or whatever it may be, it's like, well, we need to make sure they're looked after rather than the 100,000 that we're trying to target for tomorrow. So, so, which incidentally brings me on to, well, there's a couple of things really. So are you finding now that you see this as being the kind of, this is how things are going to be from now forward? Or do you see there being a kind of return to traditional practices in some areas once things kind of settle down and things open up? And a second point to that is, obviously we've had challenges and the pandemic's been a pain and all this kind of stuff. I'm massively downplaying that. But in terms of positivity, I mean, obviously the transformational element, and I'm assuming, and this is a brilliant segue for which I'm thinking you may have another slide on, in terms of kind of positive, tangible impacts.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, when I started a little bit depressively with all the concerns that that came after the pandemic, I think it's fair to also show some figures that show some hope, right? And where open banking can actually help enable all those things, and especially when we talk about positive impact. So, one thing that we've seen is that 72% of banking executives say that their interest in open banking has increased during the pandemic. So coming back to like the priorities that we've seen earlier, like first of all is the continuing shift for digital services. So we see that on average in Europe, 74% of respondents agreed that the pandemic increased the need to enhance digital services. Where open banking really enables that is and by the way, I'm showing this graph because I can imagine that attendees from across the world are joining us today, so they could look up numbers for their own market as well. But where open banking really enables this is it can increase the speed of innovation, right? Platforms such as Tink or yourselves in the digital identity space can significantly shorten the time to market for digital services. And we see, of course, like some differences across markets here. We often see that markets who maybe say like, okay, it's only just over half of executives say that they want to invest more in digital service now. Those tend to be the markets that already have like a high level of serving customers digitally. Then the second one I wanted to share with you is the differentiating on customer experience. So 70% of banking executives on average in Europe agrees that the pandemic has increased focus on customer experience. So that's not just a way to grow customer satisfaction, but also really to differentiate yourself from competitors and increase engagement and transition away from legacy channels in order to drive zero-touch services, so to say. And open banking, clearly enables financial institutions here to use account information to personalize customer experiences as well. And again, looking at some country differences here, we see quite some difference between the markets, right, on the higher and lower end. And we see that markets such as like Sweden and the Netherlands are less likely to share the view of improving user experiences because they are already used to having this in place. Whereas actually in the UK, but also Finland, Denmark, Belgium, they see that stepping up the game and when it comes to customer experience is really a top priority. Mm-hmm. And then the last one, and then I've thrown many figures at you, I imagine, but I think that's also what you mentioned earlier, right? That banks they rather look for business continuity today instead of looking for to expand their customer base. So I think there was definitely a fair point. In 2020, investments at banks have largely been targeted at that topic and reducing operational costs and supporting customers in need, so their existing customer base. So in an attempt to also reduce operational costs, we've seen many banks across Europe closing local branches. That has happened in many European countries and also the UK as well. And we've seen predictions from consultancy firms that tell us that 25% of all physical bank locations across Europe will close in the next 3 years. So declining revenues due to low interest rates, but also high operational costs, they leave little room for profit margins, but there's also an opportunity for challenger banks like the Revoluts and the Monzos and the Starlings of this world to take a share in the market, and that's also really happening. But then, where does open banking chime in this whole story? Open banking really enables banks to restore profitability by helping with operational efficiency. And what does it mean in practice? Well, think of deploying transactional data for onboarding processes or credit scoring, credit decisioning, for instance. I believe I was on a call last time with another bank where they told us that 50% of their customers don't provide the right information in the first submission, which is often done by collecting let's say you apply for a mortgage, right? And you want to see like salary slips, those kind of things. Banks ask you to transfer them by email, sometimes even physically. And if that's not done in the right way, it's like a back and forth. And open banking data can easily be fetched in a machine readable format, so that the onboarding can go much quicker and much lower cost involved.
Just to chime in there, and then that's another. I feel like I'm going into a sales pitch now, but that's another reason as to why, from our perspective, leveraging, for example, the mobile number as a method of identifying somebody, it means that actually having a consistent approach, a consistent, understanding of who somebody is and that type of element, combined with things like the open bank information, et cetera, means that, like you say, it becomes a much slicker and accurate process. Mm-hmm. So you're not having to do things time and time again. No, that's really interesting. I mean, one thing I would say is that, we're finding, again, very similar to yourselves, that when it comes to, I guess the best way of putting it is, from a fraud perspective, it's easier to maybe find a budget to do something because there's a compelling event that dictates certain things. But actually, with the pandemic itself, there's a huge element as well of maintaining profitability while creating consistent experiences, which then means it becomes more about the slicker process, the fewer clicks. And we have a number of reports and things around onboarding and what we've done around using the mobile is very similar to yourselves. So thank you. That's great. Can I just ask you, by the way, where is this report available now fully, or?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's on think.com under resources. You can find so two new reports. One is like open banking in a post-pandemic world, and the other one is the open banking revolution, so to say. So you can find them on our website. Yeah.
Right. I'm conscious that we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to go super quick into 2 questions amalgamated as one, whilst trying to answer a couple of questions very briefly that have come in from the audience. So kind of first and foremost, I think one thing that's kind of remaining to be a challenge, and I think this is going to be really appropriate for yourselves as well, is how to kind of replicate services across multiple geographies, multiple regulation, how to remain relevant, how to remain interoperable. It becomes more and more difficult, doesn't it, to kind of go global. So if I'm just very quickly use ourselves as an example, so somebody's asking here about kind of identity and kind of, what's going to win out in terms of centralized, decentralized, etc. I think the critical element for all of this, and I'd like to pick this up afterwards actually, rather than take all the time now, but the critical element is that word interoperability. So I don't think there's going to be one answer to all the world's problems when it comes to identity. I do believe it will be a decentralized approach that eventually wins out. I think one key element that we're a massive advocate of is that it's about having a kind of zero knowledge framework. So not storing information, not having kind of honeypots of data here, there, and everywhere. The reality is that you can determine who people are and what they're doing, and for the relevant service based on certain relevant attributes, as an example. But I think I'd like to pick that up more fully off the back of this particular call. But can I just ask you, so one, how do you find the geographical growth element? And secondly, in terms of growth, is there anything that you'd like to change? And you've got basically 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
From a market perspective, I mean, sorry.
Yeah. First, geographical growth. I mean, that's a question we get very often, actually. We're in 18 European markets today. And I mean, when you talk about the replication of services, and I can imagine that that's something that your customers ask for as well. Yeah. And we're in a fortunate position that we can replicate it in many markets, but there are definitely a few very essential caveats to be aware of. Because I think when it comes to open banking readiness, we see that the UK is definitely one of the leading markets, together with a couple of other European countries, such as Sweden, but also a few others. And we depend on a couple of factors also. But it's also not surprising, by the way, that UK is in the lead, because the CMA 9 order was issued a year before PSD2 came into Europe. So in the 80 markets that we are live today, we also have proper volumes being processed to the connections, because having connections in place is one thing, but then having actually volumes and being able to use those connections is another, and have high success rates as well. Before actually going into a new market for open banking, you need a couple of things. I mean, first of all, you need data legislation. You need to require security, identification of third parties, and building that entire infrastructure takes time. The other one is a thriving ecosystem of providers who actually build propositions on the infrastructure. And then the third one is actual value creation for consumers and businesses. So those three factors combined are really needed before you can launch in a new market. And we see that UK and Europe are really getting far, and also things are boiling, of course, overseas. But our focus, because of this, is really on Europe today.
Okay.
Then your second question, I'm gonna try to answer that one in 1 minute.
You've got a minute, yes. And by the way, sorry, Dan. I think if I could pick your question up afterwards as well, that'd be great. There's a huge swathe of stuff that we're doing around crypto at the moment that, I'd love to kind of explain and share with you. So yes, and apologies for missing it. I'm seeing questions come in, and I missed that one, so apologies.
We're going to take them afterwards, definitely.
Yes, exactly.
I think your question was on geographical growth, but what would we have liked to have changed, right? Yeah. I mean, I think one obstacle, like more from a regulation perspective, that we see today is the 90-day consent, how we call it. I think that causes quite some friction for third-party providers in general. If you have like a personal financial map app in place today, then the consent days and consent period, and that's an industry limitation, is 90 days today. So we would really love to, and you mentioned PSD3 earlier, let's see if something's going to happen there. We would really love this consent period to be longer than 90 days.
Okay.
So that's one thing that we would definitely have changed. There are a few other things, can definitely spend another hour on that, but I think that's one top priority.
And I apologize because we have run out of time, but I think it would be potentially another follow-up, or maybe we even draft something together to go out to market and explain what we'd like to change in the world to kind of encourage further collaboration and services, etc. So I'm going to wrap this up very quickly. Appreciate everyone who's connected, everyone who's registered. This will be available on demand, and we'll make sure that goes out. I also wanted to emphasize that we've recently announced that we have behavioral biometrics available, and we've issued a press release literally last week. So that's available globally. If you go onto prove.com, you'll find that. Massive thanks to Stefan and Tink and everybody who supported this, and again, everyone who registered. And we will not leave any questions unanswered. So thank you. Sorry we've cut it short at the end. Way too much to talk around, but hopefully you found it interesting, and see you soon. Thank you.